Hello everyone, Stormer1 here. Today we'll be checking out my severe weather season for 2023. We got a lot of stuff to go through. We'll be talking about the ENSO, some teleconnections, even the weather model, and of course my forecast as well. For this time this year, we're going to be focused more on the severe weather side, and we're actually going to be going month by month from this month, which is March, even going all the way into June as well. So, however, if you guys still want me to do a temperature precipitation outlook for the whole spring, you can let me know in the comment section down below, and I could do a part two for spring as well. Let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get and look into the current sea surface temperature anomalies. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. One of the more notable things is that we got a lot of below normal sea surface temperature anomalies along the west coast, all the way up into parts of Alaska, even going all the way down to Mexico. And some of these below normal anomalies even go back as far as Hawaii, which is an indication of what's been a very active pattern throughout the winter and even continuing into early spring for the western U.S., especially for California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah, that's been experiencing multiple storm systems or atmospheric river events that's leading to a significant amount of rainfall and snow to a lot of those areas. And I think that's going to continue over the next couple of weeks. Another thing to note is that we got this big area of above normal sea surface temperature anomalies across the north central Pacific, which is creating what's known as a negative PDO or Pacific Decadal oscillation, which is something we'll talk a little more about later in the video. Another thing to note is the Gulf of Mexico is basically boiling at the moment. That's actually really good for severe weather events. Better moisture content instability that can go pretty far north, and especially deeper into the U.S. Places like the Ohio Valley or the Midwest could certainly see some good moisture content if you could get a pretty good storm system to roll through some of those areas, which is something we've been experiencing throughout most of the winter. However, the biggest news that we recently gotten is that La Nina is gone. After a 3-year long stretch of La Nina conditions, La Nina has dissipated in the equatorial Pacific. Now, there are still some remains of the La Nina, some slight below normal anomalies across Nino 3.4 and 4. Well, I should say Nino 3 and 4. But there are some warmer than normal anomalies beginning to show up at 1 plus 2 and Nino 2 as well. And that's the thing we're going to be seeing over throughout the rest of the spring, is that these waters here are going to continue to warm up. And we could tell there by the 7-day change. So the sea surface temperature anomalies have changed over the past week. And you can see there in the equatorial Pacific, the waters are currently warming up down there in the equatorial Pacific. But where we had that big area of above normal sea surface temperatures, that's actually beginning to weaken a little bit. There's a notable large area of cooling just to the northwest of Hawaii. That could impact the PDO in the long run, potentially making it closer to neutral, which can really change the pattern for the central and western U.S., and even including severe weather season as well. And you can see there for the Gulf of Mexico still continuing to warm up, which is definitely a good sign that there could be a lot of moisture return for a lot of these severe weather setups. Well, let's talk a little bit deeper into the ENSO, and this is below the surface, so subsurface temperature anomalies. You can see here over the past couple of months, going all the way back to January 8th, you can see there, especially on the eastern end of the equatorial Pacific, those coronal anomalies are beginning to slowly subside over time. Meanwhile, in the western part of the equatorial Pacific, you got this huge blob of warmer than normal anomalies. And it seems like it's been staying pretty sustained. It's never really gained strength or weakened, but kind of in between here, there's definitely a notable amount of warming going on, kind of between 3 and 4 and 1 plus 2. And if we were to continue to scroll down on this presentation, we get to some of the historical El Nino La Nina episodes. And this goes all the way back to 2011, so some of your most recent years. And really, one of the analogs that kind of stand out is 2018. We start as a La Nina, we go to neutral phase as we head into a decent chunk of spring, and we go over to El Nino conditions by the end of the year. And that's what the forecast is on track towards. La Nina beginning of 2023 and potentially ending as an El Nino by the end of the year. Another one that's a little bit close to having El Nino conditions towards the end of the year is 2012. We started as a stronger La Nina, but we get close to El Nino by the fall, but you can see it begins to weaken a little bit, even getting close to La Nina phase by towards the end of the year. So that might be a little bit more of a loose analog. But what both of these analogs do have in common is that for severe weather-wise, it's not very active. However, both of those analogs do show a notable increase of severe weather in parts of the Midwest and the Ohio Valley. And if you were to go a little bit farther back and kind of go back a little bit deeper back into the 2000s, here's another one. 2001 doesn't quite get to La Nina, so we can't really use that as an analog, but 2006 is definitely another one where you start as La Nina in the winter, transition over to neutral phase by spring, and eventually you go to El Nino by towards the end of the year. 2009 is another one of those years, beginning as La Nina and ending as El Nino. And once again, what all these have a little bit in common is that severe weather, really overall, it's not very active. It's not really a huge season or anything like that. However, there's other areas that could get more severe weather than other areas. There's notably two areas that all these analogs have in common, is that there's an increased severe weather potential for parts of the Ohio River Valley and Midwest, and then there's a possibility for a secondary area for your more traditional tornado alley across parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. So those are the really two areas to monitor for severe weather for this upcoming severe weather season. Well, let's check out some other things here about the ENSO. And this is from a study by a lot of people in different universities. And really the chart I want you guys to pay more attention to is this one right here. I highlighted in pink. And you can see here, this is more of a weak La Nina type of phase. And really those green colors indicate the potential or increased potential for more above normal severe weather activity. And there's a notable bullseye over parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, even going into parts of Arkansas and Louisiana. And you can see here, even for a stronger La Nina phase, you can see there is much more widespread across most of the U.S. But even with a weaker La Nina phase, there's still some isolated pockets of some of those greens scattered in some areas. And there's also a notable decrease of severe weather potential in the desert southwest as well, which could impact your monsoon season later down the road. Here's another study right here, pretty much for the same thing. And this is what they found out, what happens when you get a transitioning La Nina. And what we'll be seeing here is, well, right now we are kind of a transitioning La Nina. We're going from a La Nina into a neutral phase. And you can see here with your graphs here on the left, there's your dates up there. You got March, April, and then May. You can see here what we'll be seeing a little bit similar here. For March is that you basically kind of have neutral ENSO phase, but you can see here as you go through deeper into the spring and eventually closer to summer, you can see there how El Nino kind of begins to take place. Another region to monitor is what's going on in the northern parts of the Pacific. And you got below normal anomalies more closer to the west coast, up into the Gulf of Alaska, with some above normal sea surface temperature anomalies just to the southwest, more in the central Pacific, a little closer to Hawaii. And to the left, or I'm sorry, to the right, each one of these red dots indicate increased probabilities for a tornado outbreak. And you can see there, through each month, it's not the same. It goes through different places. Beginning of March, you can see here some of those red dots kind of bullseye, really from eastern Oklahoma up into parts of the Midwest and parts of the Ohio River Valley. By April, okay, you got two different areas. You got one area across parts of the Midwest into parts of the Ohio River Valley, even down to parts of the Tennessee Valley. But notably, a much higher increase of severe weather probabilities in parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And as you head to May, those tornado outbreak probabilities really begin to back off, but there are still notable probabilities over parts of Tornado Alley. So what this kind of tells you is that there are notable severe weather outbreaks during a transitioning La Nina. However, it varies in different areas, especially as you kind of go through spring as well. In March, it's more focused from Oklahoma to Ohio Valley. April, it kind of splits to two areas, and in May, it's more focused into Torrey Alley. And once again, this is kind of based off some analog data back in the past, and they do have they do correlate into showing some of these signals. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the PDO, or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. This is more focused in the northern parts of the Pacific. And if we were to zoom in here, so off to your left here, this is more of a positive PDO. You got below normal sea surface temperature anomalies in the north central Pacific. Meanwhile, off the west coast up into the Gulf of Alaska, you got warmer sea surface temperatures. What this leads to, you got ridging across the western U.S. and eventually in the eastern U.S. There's troughing. Now with a positive PDO, that's when you don't really have much severe weather to deal with. Usually, if you want a good severe weather pattern, you want troughing in the west and ridging in the east. That usually leads to much better severe weather activity. Now, to the right here, this is our negative PDO. You got a lot of these warmer than normal anomalies out there, which is something we are currently seeing. And then you got all of this below normal anomalies across the west coast up to the Gulf of Alaska. That's why California is experiencing a lot of these atmospheric river events, because all these storm systems that roll across for parts of the Central Pacific kind of leans up into parts of California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. And that could even go a little bit much more deeper into the western U.S. Even in the Rocky Mountains is getting impacts with it as well. And even the northwestern U.S. could get impacts with it as well. And this is a much more favorable pattern for severe weather, which then again, if we were to go back, you can see there we're seeing a very similar scenario currently ongoing. And really this could bring long-term impacts. There's of course a lot of other tail connections out there like the NAO or the AO, but those are much more short-term. They're not long-term impacts. The PDO is more long-term, and I think that's a tail connection we need to be a little bit more focused on as we go through the spring. Here's another big factor, the drought monitor. And you can see here, this is your current drought monitor. So far, we've seen significant drought improvements across the western U.S., where they've been experiencing multiple rounds of storm systems that's been bringing a lot of rain and snow. And I think that drought is going to continue to subside over the next few weeks. However, the area we're a little bit more focused on when it comes to drought for severe weather is across the plains. You notice here there's some significant drought issues really from Nebraska all the way down to Texas. And typically with a drought, that can decrease severe weather potential, especially if you're within a drought. If you're within a drought, you got so much dry air, which could lead to a lot of milder air, and it can also lead to capping events as well. However, drought can also help increase severe weather potential farther to the east. It brings what's known as an elevated mixed layer. And what that is, that's drier air in the upper levels of the atmosphere. But you don't want too strong of an elevated mixed layer, otherwise convection cannot develop in that. So drought could do a couple things. They can decrease severe weather potential areas that are within the drought, but it could also increase severe weather potential for areas east of the drought. Now, if you're within this drought tier, you can still experience severe weather, especially when it comes to high wind and hail, but it's not the best when it comes to tornadoes. But still, regardless, it can still decrease your severe weather potential. I mean, you can still see severe weather outbreaks in there, but it's just not very frequent. It just happens every now and then. So, yeah, overall, it just decreases your severe weather potential. Now, if you were to look to the CPC's forecast for the drought, and this is for March, and you can see there, really across the majority of the plains, drought is going to continue to persist. Not much improvement. But if you look from a seasonal standpoint, okay, we get a lot of changes going on here. There are still some areas here. Now, the area where the elephant mixer comes from, I should have mentioned this earlier, kind of comes from southeastern Colorado, eastern New Mexico, western Texas is where the elephant mixer comes from. With that drought there being significant a little bit more farther to the east, the elephant mix layer kind of expands a little bit more farther to the east as well. There's a lot of dust flying around, you know, out in those areas, and that's kind of where your elephant mix layer pretty much comes from. But from the CPC forecast standpoint, they got drought persisting from southeastern Wyoming for eastern Colorado, eastern New Mexico, the western half of Texas and Oklahoma, and western Kansas. However, areas a little bit just to the east of it, they do predict that there will be some drought improvements, but it could still be around in some areas as well. You also notice here there's a lot of areas where drought improvements are likely, but some of that drought can stick around across most of the western U.S. to northern parts of the U.S. as well. That might be an indication where they can still experience more and more storm systems as well. You got moisture that comes from your atmospheric river vents, but you also got some systems that could come from the northwest. And when those two kind of combine with each other, you could get a big storm system in the central U.S., and that can lead to some of big severe weather events. Let's look into some other forecasts from the CPC. Let's actually check out their seasonal forecast for the spring. You can see there they got below normal anomalies across parts of the north, and you kind of know from the CPC sometimes they're a little bit too warm. So, honestly, in my opinion, I think they're a little bit undercooked with the colder air. I can see that kind of extend into parts of California and Nevada. However, one notable thing, they got a lot of warmth across the eastern U.S., even across parts of the south. This is a good pattern for severe weather. For what they see here, there can certainly be some ridging in the eastern U.S. and some troughing over parts of the north and parts of the western U.S. That could lead to some severe weather events into parts of the Midwest, even back as far west as parts of the plains into the Ohio Valley, which kind of leads us to the precipitation outlook. You can see there they got a lot of precipitation that could be predicted over parts of the Ohio Valley, Midwest, Great Lakes, even in parts of the Northeast. However, if you go back to the Four Corner states, they do predict the potential for below normal precipitation. If that were to come true, it's possible that drought there could get worse. Now, if the drought does get worse out in parts of the plains, then that's going to continue to decrease your severe weather potential. However, if the drought kind of stays the same or improves, then that can increase your severe weather chances. So that is something very important to keep in mind. But you also got to keep in mind that drought can always change throughout the season. So it's very important to keep a close eye on the drought because that can really determine your severe weather potential for not only areas in Tornado Alley, but even areas a little bit farther to the east. If that drought weakens, um, you could get a lot more precipitation in for parts of the Ohio Valley and Midwest, but that could lead to more messy mode, severe weather setups, and that can decrease your severe weather potential. Here's another potential factor is the Hangatunga volcanic eruption a little over a year ago. And this is an underwater volcano, and what happened, of course, it erupted, but it bring up a record amount of moisture way up into the stratosphere. We talked about this in my winter forecast video, which, by the way, that winter forecast video did not uh, perform very well. And this might be part of the reason right here. The thing about this eruption here is that it produced a lot of moisture or brought up a record amount of moisture up into the stratosphere, which is something we've never really seen before. So this is kind of a new thing for us. And this effect could last for several years to come. And what I think what's going on here is that with all that moisture in the upper parts of the atmosphere, that leads to some of these storm systems, especially with those atmospheric river events in the western U.S., it has a lot more moisture with them, which is leading to record snowfall and even record rainfall in the parts of California, Nevada, in some of those areas. But also what I think is what's also doing is that when we think about it, when it releases a lot of moisture, it kind of adds a lot of warm air to the stratosphere. So you get that stratospheric warming event in parts of the northern hemisphere. And I think that's somewhat happened, but I think it kind of backfires a little bit because I think what it did, and this is just a little theory here, I think it made your ridges of high pressure stronger. I think it made the ridge of high pressure in the southeast stronger than anticipated, which led to a bust of a winter for the southeast up into the east coast. But it also made that ridge of high pressure over the northern Pacific stronger as well. So it was able to help maintain that very similar pattern for a long stretch. Even though you got stratospheric warming across the northern hemisphere, you also got to keep in mind you got ridging in the southeast and you got the negative PDO pattern. So all that cold air is just getting spilled in the western, in the northern parts of the U.S. So that kind of led to a big bust of a winter. And we had that very similar thought, but what we were thinking is that it'll lead to a lot of cold air in the eastern U.S., which obviously did not happen that much throughout the winter. And this could potentially impact through the spring. This could mean that storm systems can have a little bit better moisture with them, which could potentially help back off the elevated mixed layer just a little bit. But it also can create a stronger southeast ridge, and with a lot more troughing in the western northern U.S., that could potentially lead to more powerful systems, and that can lead to increased potential for major severe weather outbreaks. And really, the area I would definitely monitor for that is the Ohio Valley Midwest. Even with a stronger southeast ridge, those areas there could get a lot of moisture and an instability for the Gulf of Mexico, which, of course, the Gulf of Mexico is well above normal for sea surface temperature anomalies. But I think one of the bigger questions is how are those low pressure systems in the western U.S. going to act when it gets to the central U.S.? However, so far, a lot of those storm systems have been very powerful. So it's possible we may get back to that very similar pattern um, as we head into April and maybe even to May as well. As you get into May, some of these tail connections that we talked about doesn't really affect much as we get to May. However, it can bring impacts to April. And here's another factor here. Now, I will say that this factor right here, it does not really affect that much in the long range. It's actually nearly impossible to predict 2 months in advance, but it is a little bit more accurate in the short to medium range. And the one we're going to be looking at is the Manajuan Oscillation, or the MGO. This is more of a short-term type of thing. And right now, we are experiencing a much colder pattern across most of the US. This is the reason why we're experiencing it. The MGO is currently in a very strong phase of 8 and eventually going into 1. Those are cold phases. And basically, it leads to a lot of cold air across most of the US. And depending on, and we really have to watch to see how the MGO kind of goes on, because you can see here the forecast does go into phases 2 and 3, or even into neutral phase as well. Because at the moment, the MGO is what's controlling our pattern. Pretty much nothing else is controlling the pattern. Because the MGO, where it's so strong, it's basically controlling our pattern at the moment. And we have to monitor and see how this MGO is going to go over the next couple weeks. But wherever this MGO gets into phases 2 or 3, or even a neutral state, which, by the way, this forecast goes all the way to March 25th, so almost to April. I think that's when we begin to see a pattern change. It's possible we may go back to the similar pattern that we were just in during January, February, which during that time period, the MGO wasn't that active. You can see there on this previous track here. Yes, it was in phases 7, 6, 5, or 4, or even 3, but it wasn't that strong, so it wasn't really impacting the pattern that much until it got all the way into phases 7, 8, and 1, which is a very strong MGO at the moment. So this is definitely something to monitor over the next couple weeks and even getting into April. However, I don't think this is going to impact that much for May, but I could be wrong on that. So next thing I want to talk about is something that's known as an MME. So this is basically insoluble mean of pretty much all of your global models, long-range models, put into one graphic. And we're going to look into probabilities. I'd rather look at probabilities than just showing you a 2-meter temperature map of how far up above normal it's going to be, because the MME does have the tendency to overestimate those warmer temperatures. So you might want to back this off just a little bit to get a little more accurate look. Now, we're a little bit too late for March, but we can at least look into April and May. So this is your probabilities for April. And you can see here, you still got some of those below normal anomalies in the western US. So we're going to continue on with this negative PDO pattern. If I were to get my paint thing out. So you kind of get this ridge of high pressure that continues to build or persist over parts of the Northern Pacific. That's linked to troughing in the western US. You're also getting stratospheric river, well, not stratospheric, atmospheric river events that kind of go into the desert southwest. So you kind of get some of these weaker storm systems that go into the desert southwest. At the same time, you're getting storm systems that kind of come from Canada. And like I said this earlier, when those two jet streams kind of merge together over the western U.S. or even the plains, that can lead to a big storm system, and that can lead to some potential for severe weather events in some of these regions right in here. But you can see here, it's got a lot of people with a probability of above normal temperatures. And like I said earlier, it has a tendency to overestimate some of these probabilities, so you might want to take a grain of salt. But still, even taking it off just by a little bit, you still got ridging in the eastern half of the U.S. Meanwhile, the western U.S. still got troughing. That's a favorable pattern for active severe weather. Another thing is that it continues to show pretty high probabilities of above normal temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's possible that the Gulf of Mexico might be able to maintain those above normal anomalies as you kind of go through April. If we were to go back and look at precipitation in the same month, and you can see here, not much way of good probabilities, or not really much of a strong signal with probabilities. But you can see here some indications for above normal precipitation across parts of Canada, and some notable probabilities for below normal precipitation in parts of the western U.S., which is something they could really need. But you notice here, there's a slot here, the potential for near normal precipitation probabilities for Mexico into Texas. So you kind of get what might be a little jet stream, maybe your subtropical jet stream that could roll through some of those areas. And at the same time, you get this jet stream that goes through here. And we'll have to wait and see how those two jet streams could merge over the central U.S. because that can really determine your severity of your severe weather potential, especially for areas a little bit farther to the east. Now, if we were to go back and check out May, you begin to notice there warm air starts to slowly take over. This is when that summer pattern starts to kind of come into play. And like I said earlier in the video, some of these teleconnections don't really impact that much as you head into the summer. Summer kind of does its own thing a little bit. But you can see a lot of warmth showing off by this model here across most of the U.S., but still got notable probability for below normal temperatures that kind of gets up into parts of California and Arizona, even the parts of Mexico as well, which could be an indication for some of these little storm systems that can move into parts of the desert southwest. And it's possible you could get some decent trough ejections out of Rockies that could go out into parts of the plains in areas a little bit farther to the east. If you were to look at precipitation, here's something a little bit interesting for May. The MME has notable probabilities for increased precipitation across the deep south and even back into parts of the southern plains, which I find that a little bit interesting. Now, if that were to be the scenario, that can certainly lead to increased potential for severe weather, which is something that analogs do suggest in parts of the southern plains. But with that drought going that is ongoing out there, I'm a little bit more skeptical about that, but I could be wrong with that. So that's just something to note there. And this, once again, is an ensemble mean. So it's interesting to kind of see that. And we can go into June, and June is pretty similar. At this point here, you're about to go into a full-blown summer-like pattern. And if you were to look into precipitation anomalies, and this can easily change here, you can consider there's not really a good signal when it comes to precipitation, really anywhere from the U.S. But once again, that can easily change. All right, so we got all those factors and stuff out of the way. Stuff y'all been waiting for is my forecast, and we're gonna do this by month because, as you probably seen, or if you watch the entire video, every month is going to be different. It's not gonna be easy just doing as a 3-month average. So I think it would make more sense to do it month by month. So for March, you can see there, I think the greatest chance for some severe weather will be across parts of deep south and the southern plains, where there's going to be so much cold air across the northern 2/3. It's going to be hard to get severe weather for areas in the Ohio Valley, Midwest, even for parts of the plains as well, which you can see in that blue area. Below normal severe weather activity looks like a good bet in these areas in there. But once again, areas in red, that's where we could see the greatest chance for severe weather. You'll get some storm systems that'll roll through in there. And I think most of these severe weather setups are going to be more of a nuisance than anything else. I don't really see a whole lot of, severe weather outbreak potential. However, given by how warm the Gulf of Mexico is, there could certainly still be some decent severe weather setups in those regions. And by the way, the time I'm making this video, we already got some severe weather forecasted in some of those areas. And I think we're going to continue that very similar theme over the next couple weeks, or pretty much for the rest of March. Areas that are not highlighted, basically near normal conditions, you could see some severe weather. It just depends where your normality is for severe weather. And the main reason why we're experiencing such a colder pattern is the MGO. The MGO is controlling the pattern, and that's going to continue over the next week or two. All right, for April, things are changing. So we got a below normal severe weather activity area for parts of Texas and Oklahoma. And that is partially due to, or mostly due to the drought conditions. And with so much a way of drought problems, that is going to lead to below normal severe weather confidence. However, you could still experience severe weather. Oklahoma and Texas just experienced a severe weather event over a week ago, even with drought conditions like they are right now. But either way, I think below normal severe weather activity would be a good bet. But once again, don't be fooled that you'll still see severe weather, but it'll just be below normal. But the greatest chance for severe weather area is going to be more focused on parts of the Ohio Valley Midwest, and that is well supported by analogs out there. All of them have a very similar theme when it comes to the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, and that could even sneak down to parts of the Tennessee Valley as well. So I think that'd be the area to really monitor for severe weather potential as you head into April. And I think it's certainly possible that April might be your most active month for severe weather out of the 3 months. So it's definitely something to really keep in mind as well. And once again, areas are not highlighted. Basically, you're near normal. All right, May is a little bit different. I got mostly everybody in near normal conditions for severe weather, but this pink area, I have it as a wild card, and I'm not really sure if I put it near normal or slightly below normal. And the main reason why is how the drought's going to evolve. If the drought is going to get worse, that's going to lead to below normal severe weather. If it improves, you could be near normal for severe weather. I don't think it'd be necessarily be above normal, but also keep in mind your average for severe weather in parts of Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas is very high. So it'd be kind of tough. You're going to need several severe weather outbreaks in order to get above normal for severe weather. So it's kind of a wild card for you guys. It's either you guys are going to be near normal or slightly below normal. Regardless, I don't really have high expectations for the plains, but given by the analog data that does suggest the potential for active severe weather in parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, that would definitely be an area to really monitor for the month of May. And as a little bonus, I did for June, and really for June, it's really hard to predict severe weather in this event, so you might want to take this as a grain of salt. But the greatest chance for severe weather area is pretty small. It's actually more focused just to the east of the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, Wyoming, even into parts of Montana, and it could go into parts of South Dakota and Nebraska. Analog data does suggest that there has been some decent severe weather events in some of those areas, so that it is something to really keep in mind. Plus, if we keep on continuing with these trough injections into June, which is something it's kind of in the unknown at this range, but if that does continue, there can certainly be some increased severe weather potential for those areas as well. And pretty much everywhere else, it's just near normal. I mean, once again, this is 4 months out, so there's a decent chance this is going to be wrong, but I think just for fun, I'll just put this out there as well, especially since severe weather can easily continue into June, but July and August and other months, that's just going to be for a different video later down the road. But anyways, guys, that's all I got for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys like this video, hit the like button. If you do like my channel, hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell notifications so you never miss an upload. If you guys have questions about this, put a comment section down below. I'll answer you guys questions. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye and have a good day.